Hello once again. I want to start out by saying I believe the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for ADHD is flawed. I have 11 points that I want to discuss with you, and I think that this, if it's adapted, could make for a better diagnostic of what we actually feel. I'm Tommy Underhill, the adult ADHD and autism specialist at Littleton Couples Counseling in Denver, Colorado, and thanks for coming by. The DSM-5 does not represent ADHD accurately because its criteria do not conceptualize ADHD as a disorder of executive functioning and self-regulation. This limitation greatly narrows the concept of ADHD, trivializes its nature as just an attention deficit problem, and discourages diagnosing clinicians from focusing on the wider range of impairment inherent in ADHD. These impairments impact executive function, self-awareness, working memory, emotional self-regulation, self-motivation, planning, problem-solving, and other functions not typically associated with the formal ADHD diagnosis. Ignoring these restricts diagnosis and ultimately treatment for many patients. Number 1, let's change the name of the disorder. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. The name describes the stereotypical problems of little boys who cannot sit still and pay attention for more than a few minutes. It really doesn't do justice to what everyone else experiences. Number 2, redefine the disorder as a syndrome that exists along a well-documented and peer-reviewed continuum of struggles. When I read the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for ADHD, I feel teleported back to the dark ages. For a community that insists on clarity, granularity, and reproducible research findings, the ADHD diagnosis is none of that. ADHD is a well-researched syndrome of executive function and self-regulation disorders, which the DSM-5 shoehorns and trivializes into inattention and hyperactivity impulsivity. The current criteria ignore the peer-reviewed research on dopamine seeking, executive inhibition, self-awareness, working memory, focus, emotional self-regulation, sleep, self-motivation, plan and problem-solving, and others. Just name a few of them here. Number 3, realize ADHD is not a deficiency of attention, nor does it always involve hyperactivity. Redefining ADHD from being a purely symptomatic definition to include neurochemical, physioneurological, and brain activity differences will bring much clarity to everyone who suffers and struggles with this. The ADHD brain differs from the neurotypical brain, whatever that is, and it's time we bring the documentable attributes of the syndrome into parity with the medical view of a broken arm. You can see it in medical scans. You can see ADHD in medical scans. Number 4, let's include a criteria of now versus not now. This is a big one that my son and wife struggle with. They will identify a task that needs to be accomplished. If they don't do it now, they usually won't get it done. Tell them to look at a list. That's great when they can do things in the now, when they look at the list now. If they don't look at the list now, the list doesn't exist. When they depend on the list to complete a task in the future, in the not now, it simply doesn't get done because the future doesn't actionably exist. Number 5, expand the diagnostic impact of additional pathways of impulsivity. The ADHD brain craves dopamine like zombies crave brains. Dopamine seeking leads to impulsivity. Number 6, look at the impact of executive function deficits in daily life. This is going to be a running topic I break down into greater nitpickiness. For example, I have no problem sitting still for hours on end, and I always got my homework done and turned in on time. The backstory is that I started homework projects the night before they were due, and I cannot keep my mind from racing on a concurrent multitude of topics. I listen to audiobooks at double speed just to keep my mind engaged. From what I've heard, I am not alone on issues like this. Number 7, as a syndrome, let's utilize different scales for both sex and age. It is well understood that ADHD affects people of different ages in different ways. Unfortunately, the differences in ADHD presentation between biochemically male and females is night and day. Considered as a syndrome, ADHD includes ongoing problems with inattention, restlessness, disorganization, planning, task completion, euphoric mood, racing thoughts, irritability, increased activity, impulsive behavior, impaired functioning, insomnia, and long hours at work with little accomplishment. That's from Adler in 2004. Executive functioning struggles, Boonstra, and other age-inappropriate behaviors combined with the inability to inhibit motor, verbal, cognitive, and emotional activities where appropriate, Barkley. Also, singular or more comorbid issues expressing both executive function and regulatory function exist, such as processing speed with NIG, time blindness, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, perfection of anxiety, both bipolar disorder symptoms, stress management, working problem memory issues, and imposter syndrome. Each and every one of these problems should be singularly diagnosed when the presenting problem is the sole presenting problem. When one looks at the big picture of how many of these symptoms comorbidly present in individual persons with ADHD, I believe as a syndrome, it is measured on an appropriate scale that reflects how ADHD impacts a person's life in real life is a more realistic view of adult ADHD. Number 8. Consider the impact of combined struggles rather than a rigid checklist of symptoms. Take me as an example. Looking at criteria 1 in the DSM-5, inattention, 5 symptoms are required for adolescents and adults. I experienced 3. Of the 9 symptoms listed in criterion 2, hyperactivity and impulsivity, where 5 are required for adolescents and adults, I can list 3 that affect me. According to the DSM, I do not have ADHD. In my college classes, project requirements would list all the criteria to address. In almost every project, I would completely miss or skip one of the criteria. I have a long history of turning in incomplete projects that were initially graded as an F. I would read the comments and include the missed item, often no more than a paragraph or 2 of material, and the project would be regraded as an A. I have a similar impact on my life when I try to follow a recipe. Number 9, discard the onset age requirement. ADHD is not exclusively a childhood disorder. The requirements that symptoms were present before age 12 often immediately disqualify many adults with deceased parents who cannot document the onset of age. Number 10, stop diagnosing ADHD as another disorder. I asked a 4th-year medical student how many days of training she received on ADHD. She said that would have been in the neuropsych unit, maybe 2 days. Couple the formal training with the societal diagnostic understanding around anxiety and depression, and you can see what most medical personnel tend to gravitate towards when presented with a person with ADHD. Doctors are simply not adequately trained in ADHD, simply because one component of the syndrome fits the better understood diagnostic criteria of anxiety or depression does not mean a person with ADHD has anxiety or depression. The impact of ADHD in one's life is often enough to bring on anxiety, depression, or a mood disorder. When anti-anxiety or antidepressants don't work, it's time to consider the larger picture. I would prefer that we look at the larger picture before we spend weeks, months, or years working with anti-anxiety or antidepressant medications. Number 11, here's the final one. Eliminate the societal and gender bias from the diagnosis. This idea goes hand in hand with utilizing a scale for the biochemical sexes. Biological females with or without children face a greater degree of complexity in their lives from gender bias in the workplace as well as in society. The gender roles between males and females are different. The medical community needs to stop attributing women's ADHD to struggles as failures to keep a clean house, maintain a schedule, or get the kids to school on time. I believe that if we can follow these changes, and I use these when I work with people in my practice, to attend to the overriding struggles somebody has, and not just checklists on a form. Let's look at the bigger picture of ADHD, and let's keep getting people help. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like and subscribe. This was a big one. I'll see you next time.